The old man read out the decree. He thrust a map into his hands, he mounted a lizard, and rode away. And now the man stands on his knees in the middle of the desert, the owner of 800 kilometers of sand and 3 days of life. Sand gets under his fingernails. That is the first thing Daniel So feels. Not the light, not the heat. Sand. Hot and fine as red hot. He doesn't remember how he ended up here. He remembers only the old man in a faded robe and a foreign language he somehow understood. By decree of the Council of Nine, the lands of the Grey Bowl are transferred to Barren So. That is the entire gift. A medallion dangles around his neck, a white bowl on a gray field. The taste of iron in his mouth. Daniel raises his head and sees sand, rocks, and scorched earth stretching to the horizon in all 4 directions. Not a tree, not a shadow, not a drop of water. The sun beats down so hard that the air shimmers over the ground like over a frying pan. He tries to stand up. His legs buckle. He falls. He tries again. He stands up and looks at his hands. They aren't his. Younger, thinner. No scar on the finger he got at the construction site in Incheon 12 years ago. Someone else's hands, but they obey him. He clenches his fist, unclenches it. It works. Daniel unfolds the map. Rough paper, no scale, no grid, just an outline and an inscription in the center. The Grey Bowl. 800 square kilometers of dead sand, and it's all his. He would have laughed if there had been even a drop of moisture in his mouth. Instead, he sits down and thinks. Panic won't bring water. Hysteria won't bring water. And without water, a person lives for 3 days. He knows that for sure. He knows because he spent 14 years designing water supply systems. He built desalination plants in Saudi Arabia. He drew up plans for collection systems in Incheon. He doesn't know where he is or how he got here, but he knows one thing. He is an engineer, and the first thing an engineer needs in the desert is water. Daniel licks his finger and holds it up. The wind is coming from the southeast, weak but steady. He surveys the terrain. To the west, the horizon dips slightly. An ordinary person wouldn't notice, but Daniel isn't an ordinary person. A dip means a slope. A slope means that water once flowed here. And where water flowed, there may be an aquifer. He stands up and heads west. The sand gives way beneath his feet. The sun burns the back of his neck. His tongue sticks to the roof of his mouth. He walks and counts his steps, an old habit from his fieldwork. 2,000 steps. And then he sees the first stone. Not a stone, a slab the size of a dining table jutting out of the sand at an angle. The edges are too even. The surface is too smooth. Someone has worked this stone. Daniel brushes the sand away with his palm and freezes. Lines beneath the sand. Thin grooves form a complex, symmetrical pattern. A rune. An ancient symbol of the lost civilization of the firstborn. The pattern runs across the entire slab, but in one place, the line breaks off. It just breaks off, like a wire cut by scissors. The locals surely consider this rune dead, burned out. But Daniel has been reading schematics for 14 years. Electrical ones, hydraulic ones. And he doesn't see a magical symbol. He sees an open circuit. The rune's outline hasn't burned out. Its closing stroke has fallen off, like a relay with a loose contact. 6 centimeters of line and the circuit will close. He pulls a knife from his belt. Where the knife came from is unclear. Apparently it came as part of the barony. Daniel cuts into the stone, hard. The groove comes out crooked and shallow, but it's working. 6 centimeters. The line closes. And nothing happens. Of course nothing happens. A circuit without current is just a drawing. The rune needs energy, and he has neither a heartstone nor mana crystals. Nothing but a knife and a map. And blood. He looks at his palm. Blood is a liquid. Liquids carry salts and minerals. Minerals conduct electricity. Maybe in this world, blood conducts mana. Maybe not. But in 2 days, he'll die of dehydration if he doesn't try. Daniel slashes his palm with the knife. He presses it against the cut and smears the blood across the groove. A second, 2, 3, and the rune glows, dimly. A bluish glow runs along the lines like water through a channel. Daniel pulls his hand away and crawls back. The glow travels the entire outline and fades. The slab hums. The air around the stone grows damp. He can feel it on his skin. The rune is drawing moisture from the air, gathering condensation. It's working. It's working. He falls onto his back and closes his eyes. His heart is pounding. His hands are shaking. All around him, for 800 kilometers, lies a dead desert. No food, no shelter, not a single ally. But the rune is working. By morning, a puddle of clear water the size of a plate has gathered at the base of the slab. Daniel lowers his face and drinks, long and hard. The water is cold and sweet. Tears mix with water and sand, streaming down his face. Then he sits down. He looks at the rune glowing a dim blue, at the puddle slowly growing, and he speaks aloud. You weren't burned out here. You just haven't been repaired in 1,000 years. He stands up, wraps a strip of fabric from his hem around his palm, and goes to look for the next slab. For the next 3 days, Daniel didn't stray more than a kilometer from the slab. The puddle grew slowly. By the end of the second day, it was yielding about 2 liters a day. That was enough not to die, but not enough to live. He surveyed the area around the slab in an expanding spiral, a classic search pattern. Each circle 50 meters wider than the previous one. On the third circle, he found 2 more slabs. Both were almost completely buried in sand. Both had runes, both had breaks. The first was a moisture-gathering rune, the same as the one he had repaired. The break was in a different place, but the principle was the same. Daniel finished drawing the line and used blood again. The rune came to life. The second slab was different. The pattern was distinct. The lines did not form a ring, but radiated from the center like the spokes of a wheel. Daniel sat in front of it for half an hour, trying to understand the logic. If the first rune gathered moisture from the air, this one did something else. He ran his finger along the grooves. The rays radiated from the center and curved downward at the edges. Down, into the ground. The rune wasn't drawing water from the air, it was drawing water from below, from the soil. Daniel felt his mouth go dry, but not from thirst, from excitement. If there was an aquifer beneath this sand, and if the rune could reach it, then this wasn't a puddle, it was a well. He finished drawing the line. He cut his other palm because the first one hadn't healed yet. He smeared the blood. The rune lit up, and nothing happened. He waited an hour, 2, 3, nothing. Daniel lay down on the sand next to the slab and thought. The rune works. He sees the glow. The circuit is closed, but there's no water. Why? He ran through the possibilities. The aquifer is too deep. The rune is damaged not just on the surface. There isn't enough blood energy. Or, he sat up, or the rune needs an outlet. It's drawing water from below but has nowhere to release it, like a pump without a pipe. Daniel walked around the slab. On the north side, he discovered a groove in the stone, shallow, clogged with sand and small gravel. He cleared it with his knife. The groove led from the edge of the slab somewhere to the north. He followed it, clearing away the sand as he went. After 20 meters, the groove ran into a stone basin, a round depression in the rock about 1 meter in diameter and half a meter deep. The basin was clogged with mud and stones. Daniel cleaned it out for 2 hours with his bare hands. When he finished and returned to the slab, there were already 2 inches of murky water at the bottom of the basin. By morning, the basin was full. The murky water had become clear. 15 liters. 15 liters a day. Daniel sat on the edge of the basin and looked at the water. 15 liters is enough for 3 people. No, 5 if we conserve. No. First, he needed to assess the stability. Measure the inflow over a week. Check for seasonality. Check the quality. He caught himself planning the water supply. One man in the desert on a foreign continent, in a foreign world, in a foreign body. And he was planning the water supply. Daniel laughed, quietly and hoarsely. Then he leaned over and drank. He spent the 8th day building a shelter. Near the stone slabs lay fragments of rock. He built 3 walls out of them. The rock itself served as the 4th wall. He made the roof out of flat stones laid across. It turned out low and crooked. He couldn't stand upright inside, but there was shade. And shade meant he was losing 1/3 less water through sweat, and that meant 15 liters would last longer. He spent the 9th day scouting. He went further west. After 2 kilometers, the sand gave way to a rocky plain. There were more slabs here. Some jutted out of the ground. Some lay on top of each other like fallen dominoes. On one, he found a rune he didn't recognize. The pattern was more complex than the previous ones. A multitude of thin lines intertwined into a spiral. He traced it onto the back of the map with the tip of his knife. It would come in handy later. On the 10th day, a scent appeared. Daniel woke at dawn and sensed something new in the air. Dampness. Not the dampness the runes gave off, a different kind, a living one. The scent of wet earth and something plant-like. He emerged from his shelter and followed the scent. 500 meters away he found it, a thin crack in the bedrock from which water was seeping. Not runic, natural. Condensation had gathered in an underground cavity at night and was being squeezed out through the crack in the morning. No more than a liter a day. But grass was growing around the crack. Thin, yellow, barely alive, but grass. So there is soil here, a thin layer beneath the sand. So something can be grown here, someday. On the 12th day she came. Daniel was sitting by the bowl, filtering water through a cloth. He heard footsteps, heavy, slow, shuffling. He turned around. An old woman was walking toward him across the sand, small, hunchbacked, with a sack on her back and a stick in her hand. She walked straight toward him as if she knew where to go. Daniel stood up. His hand instinctively reached for the knife. The old woman came within 10 meters and stopped. She looked at him. She looked at the bowl of water. She looked at the stone shelter. Then she looked at the slab with the burning rune, and her eyes grew wide. She said she had been walking for 3 days. She said she had sensed water. She said there had been no water in the wasteland for 200 years, and she hadn't believed it when the wind carried the scent of dampness. But she went to check. Because when you're 72 years old and a herbalist without a tribe, you've got nothing to lose. Her name was Nara. She knew every plant within a 100-kilometer radius. She knew where the bitter saltwort grew, from which you could brew a fever remedy. She knew where the clay lay close to the surface. She knew which nomadic trails ran 3 days' journey to the east. Daniel poured her some water into a clay shard she'd pulled from her bag. Nara drank slowly. Then she sat down. Then she asked how he had lit the dead rune. Daniel showed her the crack in the second slab. He showed her how he had drawn the line. He showed her the groove leading to the bowl. Nara watched and said nothing. Then she said that he was either a madman or a firstborn who had returned from beyond the edge. Daniel replied that he was simply an engineer. Nara didn't understand the word. He said he was a man who fixed broken things. Nara nodded. She understood that. By the evening of the 12th day, there were 2 of them. Nara set her bag in the corner of his stone shelter and said she would show him where to find clay in the morning. Clay was needed for everything. For the oven, for dishes, for walls. Daniel didn't argue. He had worked in construction for 13 years and knew perfectly well that clay is the foundation of civilization. They sat by the bowl as twilight fell. 2 glowing runes flickered with a blue light in the darkness. Nara asked what he planned to do next. Daniel looked at the map. At 800 square kilometers of desert. At 2 working runes out of probably hundreds. At a single stone bowl yielding 15 liters a day. And he said he was going to build a city. Nara looked at him for a long time. Then she said he was definitely crazy. But he had found water. So she would stay to see what happened next. Daniel found a second rune that drew water from the ground and restored the stone storage bowl, yielding 15 liters a day. On the 12th day, an old herbalist named Nara came to him, drawn by the scent of water in the wasteland. She became his first ally and promised to show him the clay deposits. Nara didn't lie. On the morning of the 13th day, she led him south, 2 kilometers across a rocky plain, then a steep descent into a shallow ravine. At the bottom of the ravine, the earth was a different color, red-brown, dense. Nara poked it with a stick, and the stick sank in 2 fingers deep. Clay. Daniel crouched down and picked up a lump in his hands. He kneaded it. He sniffed it. Good clay. Rich. Malleable. No large inclusions. He'd seen this kind at sites in Saudi Arabia. You can mold it. You can build with it. If fired properly, it becomes stronger than wood. The problem is that firing requires fire. Fire requires fuel, and there is no fuel in the desert. He asked Nara what burns in these parts. She said that nomads burn dry brush and lizard dung. The brush grows along the eastern border of the bowl, a 3-day journey away. Dung can be found on the caravan trails. 3 days journey for fuel, 3 days back. A week for each batch. That's not a solution, it's a stopgap. Daniel thought about it for 2 days. On the 15th day, he returned to the slabs and began searching. He now knew what to look for. If the firstborn built a city here, they had runes for everything. For water, for light, for fertility. So there had to be a rune for heat, for fire, for heating. He went around all the slabs he could find. 17 of them within a square kilometer. He sketched every rune onto a map. He compared the patterns. He tried to find a logic to them. By evening on the 16th day, he found it. The slab was lying face down. That was why he hadn't noticed it before. He had to dig up the sand and flip it over using a lever made from a piece of broken stone. There was a rune on the reverse side. The pattern ran in zigzags, sharp angles, sharp turns, like a saw, or like a cardiogram. Daniel ran his hand along the grooves. A zigzag signifies oscillation. Oscillation is energy, thermal energy. This is the rune of heat. It had a break in it. Of course it did, just like all the others. He finished drawing it, cut his hand for the 3rd time. The rune came to life. The stove grew warm. An hour later, it was hot. 2 hours later, you couldn't touch it with a bare hand. Daniel placed a lump of clay on it. 6 hours later, the clay had become pottery. Rough, cracked, but pottery. He sat next to the scorching stove, looking at the fired piece of clay and thinking. The rune of water. The rune of heat. Where the rune of light should be here. The rune of growth. The rune of wind. A whole set of tools scattered across the desert and buried in sand. For 1,000 years, no one had touched them because everyone thought they were dead. But they were simply broken. For the next 2 weeks, he worked. Nara helped. She hauled clay out of the ravine. He shaped bricks. Rough, uneven, the size of a palm. He fired them on the rune slab, 20 at a time. From the bricks, he built his first real wall. 1 meter high, 2 meters long, crooked, but standing. Nara said she'd seen prettier walls. Daniel replied that the pretty ones would come later. Right now, they needed sturdy ones. By the end of the 1st month, they had a shelter with 3 brick walls and a stone roof. 3 working runes. A 2-day supply of water in 3 clay pots that Daniel had molded and fired himself. And a rune diagram, the first one in his life. He drew it on a flat stone with charcoal. A moisture-gathering rune connected to a concentration rune he'd found on the 17th tablet. The idea was simple. 1 rune gathers moisture from the air. The second concentrates it at a single point. If you connect them with a circuit, you get not just a puddle, but a directed stream. The problem was that he couldn't test the circuit. He had no mage. He had no heartstone. His own blood activated the single runes, but the 2-rune circuit required more energy than his cut palm could provide. He set the drawing aside and decided to wait. Someone would come. Nara had come on the scent of water. Someone else would come on the scent of smoke or the glow of runic light at night. The desert only seems empty. On the 30th day, 2 more arrived, a man and a boy, father and son, nomads from an eastern tribe. The father's name was Tarek. The son was 10, and his name was Iris. Tarek was big and silent. He had hands the size of shovels and a back covered in scars from sandstorms. He had come because his tribe had cast him out for a debt he could not repay. He had seen the light of the runes at night from a day's journey away and had toward it because there was nowhere else to go. Iris didn't speak. At all. Nara said that happened sometimes. The child had fallen silent and would speak when he was ready. Daniel gave them water. He showed them the shelter. He showed them the runes. Tarek looked at the glowing slabs and said nothing. Then he looked at the brick wall, at the pots, at the bowl of water, and asked one thing. What needed to be done? Daniel said they needed to haul stones. Tarek nodded and went to carry stones. On the 32nd day, Daniel noticed that Iris was sitting in front of a rune slab, running his finger along the grooves. The rune beneath his finger glowed brighter. The boy did this mechanically, like a child drawing with a stick in the sand. He didn't understand what he was doing. But Daniel, the boy had a gift. He could power the runes. Daniel sat down next to Iris. He took out his sketch, spread it out on the sand, and began to explain, silently, drawing lines and arrows in the sand with his finger. Here is the rune of water. Here is the rune of concentration. Here is the outline that connects them. Iris watched. Then he placed both palms on the diagram, and the outline flared up, all at once. Blue light ran along the lines in the sand hissed, the air grew damp, and out of nowhere, right in the middle of the desert, it started to rain. Tiny, 2 meters in diameter, drops as fine as mist, but it was rain. Iris laughed, the first sound he had made in all that time. Nara stepped out of cover and stood beneath the drops. She closed her eyes. Tarek approached his son and placed a hand on his head. His hand was trembling. Daniel watched the tiny rain in the desert and thought one thing. 4 of us. There are 4 of us. There is water. There is heat. There is a mage. Now we can begin. Daniel found the rune of heat and learned to fire clay without fuel. In the first month, he built a brick shelter and created his first rune diagram on paper using 2 runes. On the 30th day, the nomad Tarek arrived with his son Iris. Iris turned out to be a gift bearer and was able to activate the first combined rune pattern, creating a light drizzle. Now Daniel has a mage who can power his projects. Daniel hadn't slept for 2 days. He was sketching. The flat stones around his shelter were covered in charcoal lines. Schemes. Dozens of schemes. Now that he had Iris, capable of powering the runes with energy, everything had changed. Before, he could only repair single runes. Now, he could combine them. The first task was obvious. A night condenser. Not a single rune gathering moisture from the air, but a system. A moisture-gathering rune, plus a concentration rune, plus a cooling rune he found on the 14th slab. The principle was simple. At night, the desert cools down. The temperature difference between the hot sand and the cold air creates condensation. If you take a moisture-gathering rune and connect a cooling rune to it, the temperature difference increases. A greater difference means more condensation. If you add the concentration rune, all the collected condensation flows to a single point. It doesn't dissipate. It isn't absorbed into the sand. It goes where it's supposed to. He drew a circle on the stone platform the size of a tent. 3 runes, 3 connecting lines, 1 exit point. Iris placed his palms on the circle and closed his eyes. The runes flared up. Daniel stood nearby and counted. The first liter collected in 20 minutes, the second in 15. By morning, there were 20 liters in the stone basin beneath the exit point. 20 liters of clean water in a single night. Nara came to look. She touched the water. She sniffed it. She tasted it. She said the water was cleaner than in any well of the eastern tribes. Daniel nodded. He knew. Condensate is distilled water. It doesn't get any cleaner than that. Tarek looked at the full basin and said nothing. Then he said that in the east, 10 people would have been killed for a well like this. Daniel replied that there would be no need to kill anyone. He would build another one, and another. The second task was more difficult: food. They had water, they had heat, they had shelter. But 4 people consume at least 2 kilograms of food a day. Nara gathered edible roots and dried insects. Tarek set traps for sand lizards. That was barely enough. They needed a field. Daniel knew which crop to choose: barley, the most undemanding grain crop on earth. It grows in salty soil, it tolerates heat, it matures in 3 months, if he has something to plant. He asked Nara. Nara said that wild barley grows along the eastern caravan trails. The ears are small and tough. But it was barley. Tarek set off eastward the next morning. He took a sack, 3 clay flasks of water, a knife. He returned 6 days later. The sack was half full of seeds, wild barley, small and unremarkable, but alive. Daniel chose a plot, a flat area south of the shelter, 100 square meters to start with. The problem was that there was no soil. There was sand and rock. He remembered the landscaping projects in Saudi Arabia. There, they used clay pellets mixed with compost to create artificial soil. He didn't have compost, but he had clay from the ravine and ash from the lizards Tarek had roasted. Ash is potassium and phosphorus. Clay retains moisture. If you mix clay with ash and sand in the right proportions, you get poor but usable soil. For 3 days they hauled clay. Daniel mixed it with ash and sand. Tarek leveled the site. Nada grumbled that at 72 years old, she hadn't hauled that much dirt. Then she said and carried on. Iris sat nearby, drawing runic patterns on the stones with his finger. Daniel noticed that the boy was copying his designs. Not exactly, in his own way, changing the angles of the lines, adding curls. It was interesting. He put that thought aside for later. On the 45th day, the field was ready. 100 square meters of man-made soil, a palm's depth. Daniel dug a channel from the runic bowl to it. The water flowed by gravity down a 2% slope. He measured the slope using a clay bowl filled with water. If the water in the bowl stands still, the surface is level. If it shifts toward the edge, there is a slope. A primitive level, but it works. The seeds went into the ground on the 52nd day. Daniel planted them in rows, 15 centimeters between seeds, 30 between rows. Each seed was planted 2 fingers deep. Nada said he was planting like a madman. No one plants barley with a ruler. Daniel replied that proper planting geometry increases the yield by 20% due to uniform access to water and light. Nara looked at him for a long time. Then she said he was definitely from another world. Daniel said nothing. On the 60th day, the seedlings appeared, thin green threads pushing through the brown soil. Nara saw them first. She called the others. The 4 of them stood at the edge of the field and looked at the green fuzz the size of a fingernail. Tarek was silent. Iris crouched down and touched the sprout with her finger. Nara quietly remarked that nothing had grown in the gray bowl for 200 years. Daniel looked at the sprouts and thought of something else. He thought that 100 square meters of barley would yield about 10 kilograms of grain in 3 months. 10 kilograms would last 20 days for 4 people. This isn't a solution. It's the beginning of a solution. We need more land, more water, more runes, more people. He crouched down next to Iris. The boy looked at him. Daniel pointed at the green sprouts. Then he swept his arm across the horizon. All of this will be green. Not soon, but it would be. Iris smiled. On the 65th day, another person arrived. A young man of about 20, skinny as a stick, with a battered face and rope marks on his wrists. He came from the northeast. He was staggering. He fell. He got up. He fell again. Tarek saw him first and brought him to the bowl. He poured water into it. The guy drank and coughed, drank and coughed. Then he fell asleep. When he woke up, he said his name was Min, that he had been a slave in a caravan heading south, that his master beat him every day, that he had escaped at night by gnawing through a rope, that he had walked for 4 days without knowing where he was going, that he had seen the light of the runes in the desert and followed it. Daniel asked what he knew how to do. Min said nothing. That he was a slave, and slaves aren't taught anything. Daniel looked at his hands. Broad palms, calluses on his fingers. He asked what Min did in the caravan. Min said he carried bales, and repaired wagon wheels, and mended tents, and shooed lizards. Daniel nodded. He said that a man who knows how to fix wheels and shoe lizards knows a great deal, and that there are no slaves in the gray bowl. There are residents. Min looked at him without blinking. Then he asked what he needed to do to stay. Daniel said the same thing he'd told Tarek. Carry stones. Min stood up and went to carry stones. By the end of the second month, there were 5 of them. The hut had turned into a stone house with 2 rooms. The field was turning green. 3 rune systems were running around the clock. 20 liters of water a day from the condenser. 15 from the underground rune. 2 from a natural fissure. 37 liters. It was enough. Just barely. But it was enough. And every night, 2 glowing runes were visible in the desert for tens of kilometers, like lighthouses, like a signal. There is water here. There is life here. Come here. Daniel built a night condenser from 3 runes that produced 20 liters of water a day. He planted the first field of barley on man-made soil made of clay, ash, and sand. On the 60th day, the first shoots appeared. A runaway slave named Min joined the camp, becoming its 5th inhabitant. By the end of the second month, 3 rune systems were operational, and the field was turning green. On the 78th day, Daniel found a well. He had been searching for it for 3 weeks. Every day he went on a reconnaissance mission 2 or 3 kilometers from the camp. He expanded the map. He marked every slab on it, every rune, every crack in the rock. A pattern began to emerge on his map. The slabs were not scattered at random. They lay in circles, concentric circles like ripples on water. The center of the circles was 3 kilometers west of the camp. Daniel reached the center and discovered a pit, a hole 5 meters in diameter, filled with stone debris. He climbed down. It was 4 meters deep. At the bottom lay the remains of masonry, cut stones, mortar between them. This was not a natural formation. It was a well. A well filled with stones and sand, but a well nonetheless. He returned to camp and brought everyone there the next day. Tarek and Min cleared the debris. Daniel supervised. Nara sat above and watched over the boy. Iris, as usual, was drawing runes on the stones. They dug for 3 days, pulling out the stones one by one. At a depth of 6 meters, Min struck the rock with a crowbar and jumped back. A jet of water shot out from under the stone, a thin stream, under pressure. Daniel climbed down. The water was cold, clear, with a slight mineral taste. An underground spring, artesian. The pressure pushed the water upward on its own. No need to pump, no need for a bucket on a rope. The water flowed by itself. He sat at the bottom of the well, ankle deep in water, and calculated. The flow was about 2 liters per minute, 120 liters an hour, 2,800 liters a day. That would be enough for 40 people, with some to spare. He climbed back up, wet, dirty, with a wild smile on his face. He said one word: water. Tarek nodded. Min sat down on the ground and covered his face with his hands. Nara whispered a prayer. Iris walked to the edge and looked down. For the next 2 weeks, they worked on the well. Daniel designed a lining of fired bricks. Tarek and Min laid the bricks in a circle, layer by layer, from the bottom up. Clay mortar between the bricks. On top, a stone platform with a drainage channel. The channel led to a new basin, a large one, 2 meters in diameter, 200 liters in volume. Daniel dug a trench from the basin to the field. He expanded the field, 200 square meters now, then 300. There was enough water. Near the well, he found 4 more slabs. He cleared them away. 3 turned out to be runes he already knew: water, heat, concentration. The 4th was new. The pattern ran in waves, smooth lines flowing into one another like ripples on the sea. Daniel sketched the rune and pondered it for 3 days. Waves, flow, movement. This is a rune of flow, not an electric current, the flow of liquid. It forces the water to move in a specific direction. It's a pump, a rune pump. If he connected it to the well, the water wouldn't just rise under its own pressure, it would go where needed, at the right speed, in the right volume. He sketched a diagram, the rune of flow connected to the well, plus the rune of concentration to direct the flow, plus the rune of filtration, which he pieced together from 2 half-erased symbols on different tablets. The result was a water intake. Rough, primitive by his own standards, but it worked. He called Iris. Malshik placed his hands on the circuit. The runes flashed. Water from the well flowed through the channel, in a steady stream, without interruption. Clean, filtered. Nara tasted the water from the channel. She said it tasted better than the well water. Daniel explained that the filtration rune removes excess minerals and sediment from the water. Nara said he was using strange words, but the water really did taste good. On the 95th day, more people arrived. Not just 1 or 2, 7. A nomadic family, an old man, his 2 daughters, 4 grandchildren. The old man's name was Bazir. He was the chief of a small clan that had lost its livestock in a sandstorm 2 months ago. Without livestock, a nomad is dead. Bazir was heading to the coast to sell his grandchildren into service to merchants. It wasn't a choice, it was the only thing he could do. On the way, he saw a green field in the desert. He decided he was hallucinating from the heat. He walked closer. He wasn't hallucinating. Daniel met them at the well. He gave them water. He fed them barley flour flatbreads. Nara washed the children's festering eyes. Tarek gave the old man his cloak because the nights in the desert are cold. Bazir sat and ate and said nothing. Then he asked what kind of place this was. Daniel said it was the Grey Bowl. Bazir said the Grey Bowl was a dead land where criminals and madmen were exiled. Daniel replied that it was true. He was a madman, but the land is not dead. Bazir looked at the green field, at the well from which clear water flowed, at the brick house, at the burning runes, and he said that his grandchildren know how to work, that he himself is old but can still tend livestock if there is any, that his daughters know how to weave and cook, and that if the Baron allows it, his family will stay. Daniel said there was no Baron in the Grey Bowl. There were people who built. Bazir could build with them or leave. Bazir chose to stay. 12 people. Daniel began to think on a larger scale. 1 house was not enough. 1 field isn't enough. 1 well is enough for water, but not for distribution. If people live in one place, the field in another, and the well in a third, then time is wasted every day walking, time that could be spent working. He picked up a flat stone. He drew a plan with charcoal. A well in the center, 4 channels leading out in 4 directions, houses along the channels, fields behind the houses, farm buildings behind the fields. He drew it without thinking. His hand moved on its own. 14 years of designing urban infrastructure, a modular layout, water in the center, life all around, everything within a 5-minute walk. He showed the plan to Nara. Nara said it looked like a flower, 4 petals radiating from the center. Daniel looked at the drawing. She was right. It really did look like a flower. He showed the plan to Tarek. Tarek looked at it silently. Then he asked how many stones were needed. Daniel said a lot, a great many. Tarek nodded and left. By the end of the 3rd month, the outlines of the future settlement were visible. 4 trenches from the well, the foundations of 4 houses, a field expanded by 400 square meters. The barley was sprouting, green and thick. Nara had said it wouldn't grow in soil like this. It had grown. Daniel knew it would grow. He had calculated the mineral composition of the soil. He had calculated the amount of water needed, calculated the sowing depth. Math doesn't lie. Even in a world where stones glow and water flows at the command of symbols on the rock, math works everywhere. On the 98th day, he stood on a stone ledge west of the well and looked down. A small settlement, 12 people, 1 well, 3 rune systems, 1 field, 4 houses at various stages of construction. He didn't see what was there. He saw what would be. Water pipes running through all 4 channels, rune lanterns at the intersections, a granary by the northern channel, a workshop by the southern one, a school, a market, a wall around the perimeter, a city. He saw a city, and he knew how to build it, step by step, pipe by pipe, rune by rune. Nara's voice rose from below. She was calling them to dinner. Daniel went downstairs. 12 people were sitting around the fire. Flatbreads made from the first barley, water from the well. Bazir's children were laughing because Edis was showing them little sparks on his fingertips. Tadek was silent and smiling. Min was repairing the strap on his sandal with the concentration of a surgeon. Nara was handing out the flatbreads and grumbling that the barley was tough. Daniel sat down between Tadek and Nara. He took a flatbread. He took a bite. The flatbread was hard and bland. He had never eaten anything tastier in his life. Daniel discovered a buried ancient well with artesian water yielding 2,800 liters a day. He built a runic water intake consisting of 3 runes. On the 95th day, the 7-member Bazir nomadic family arrived. The population grew to 12. Daniel sketched a modular plan for the settlement, with the well at the center and 4 radiating channels. The first barley crop was nearly ripe. On the 120th day, she arrived. Daniel was standing knee-deep in a ditch, leveling the bottom with clay mortar, when Yuna shouted from the lookout stone that someone was coming from the east. He climbed out and shielded his eyes with his hand. The figure was walking slowly, swaying, dragging something large and shapeless behind them, a sack. A huge sack stuffed so full that the corners were sticking out in all directions. The figure fell, got up, fell again. Tarek went to meet them. He returned half an hour later, carrying the sack on one shoulder and the woman on the other. She was thin, pale to the point of being bluish. A pair of glasses with a single lens made of polished quartz sat crookedly on her nose. The other lens was cracked. Her hair was matted with dust and sweat. She was unconscious. Nara poured water into her mouth. The woman coughed. She opened her eyes. The first thing she said wasn't, "Where am I?" or, "Don't give me water." She said not to touch the bag. There were books in the bag. Daniel opened the bag. Books. 23 books. Heavy volumes in leather bindings, some with metal clasps, some so old that the pages crumbled at the touch. She had dragged 23 books across the desert. That's 30 kilograms in weight, across the desert, alone. When she came to, she gave her name, Han So-yeon, 26 years old, a former student of the Rune Academy at House Varick. Former because she had been expelled. 10 years ago, she had come to the academy with the idea that runes could be combined into patterns, that a single rune was a letter and a pattern was a word, that if one learned to form words from runic letters, one could do things no one had ever thought of. They had laughed at her for 10 years. The professors called her a heretic. Her peers called her crazy. 3 months ago, the dean of the academy summoned her and said that her research was bringing the school into disrepute, that she had to leave. So-yeon left. She took her books. She went wherever her eyes took her, and her eyes looked south, toward the Grey Bowl. Because a month ago, at the trading exchange in Korheim, she saw something that took her breath away. A clay flask, rough, crooked, with the mark of the Grey Bowl, and a runic inscription on the bottom. Not a single rune, a pattern. 3 runes connected into a circle, exactly as she had described in her writings 10 years ago. Who in the dead wasteland had made what she had dreamed of since she was 16? She had walked here for 3 weeks. Daniel listened to her story and said nothing. Then he stood up. He went into the house. He returned with a flat stone on which his drawings were etched. He placed the stone in front of So-yeon. She looked at the drawings, then at him, then back at the drawings. Then she took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Then she put her glasses back on and looked again. Daniel asked what she saw. So-yeon said she saw a mistake, right here, at the junction between the current rune and the filtration rune. The line runs at a right angle. It can't be at a right angle. Rune energy loses 20% of its power at every right angle. We need a smooth turn, an arc. Daniel looked at her. Then he sat down next to her. He picked up a piece of charcoal. He said one thing. Show me where he's doing it wrong. So Jan spent 4 hours showing him. She analyzed every one of his diagrams. She found 11 mistakes. She explained why a cooling rune cannot stand next to a heat rune without a buffer symbol between them. She explained that a filtration rune actually consists of 2 sub-symbols, and knowing this allows one to tune it for different types of impurities. She explained that the closing stroke he was drawing with a knife on the slabs wasn't just a line, but a control element, and that its thickness and depth affected the rune's power. Daniel listened and drew. He drew and listened. He asked questions. She answered. He asked more. She answered again. By midnight, they were sitting on the floor in his house amid dozens of carved stones, arguing about what angle of the arc was optimal for connecting a pressure rune with a current rune. Nara peeked through the door. She looked at them. She shook her head. She went to bed. Soyeon stayed. From that day on, everything changed. Daniel knew engineering. He knew how to build systems, how to calculate loads, how to design flows, but he didn't know runes. He guessed, he tried, he made mistakes. Soyeon knew runes. She had studied them for 10 years. She knew every symbol of the firstborn from the books. She knew the theory that no one else studied anymore. But she couldn't think in systems. She saw runes as separate elements, beautiful, complex, but separate. Together, they were like the right and left hand. He drew the outlines, she filled them with the correct runes. He calculated pressure and volume. She selected the symbols that would produce the desired effect. Their first joint project took a week, an improved condenser, 5 runes instead of 3. Instead of 20 liters a day, 60. Instead of 1 outlet, 3. Iris activated the new circuit. The runes flared up all at once, brighter than ever. Water flowed through 3 channels simultaneously, pure, cold. Soyeon stood next to Daniel and watched the circuit in operation. Her hands were shaking. Daniel asked what was wrong. She said that for 10 years she'd been told it was impossible, that runes couldn't be combined, that she was making it up. And now she was standing in the desert, watching 5 runes work together, and they were working. She wasn't crying, but her lips were trembling. Daniel didn't say anything. He took out the next drawing, the rune aqueduct, 5 kilometers. From the well to the eastern edge of the territory where Nara had found another clay deposit. Soyeon looked at the drawing. She wiped her eyes, put on her glasses, and said that here the line ran at a right angle again. By the end of the 4th month, the population of the Grey Bowl had reached 30 people. They came one by one and in groups. Nomads who had lost their livestock. Runaway peasants from the east. An old potter who had been driven out of his village by the new village head. A family of miners who had been promised work in the north and then cheated. They all came on hearsay. There is water in the desert. Barley grows in the desert. Runes that haven't burned in 1,000 years are burning in the desert. Daniel welcomed everyone. He asked each one what they could do. He gave each one work. The potter began making dishes and bricks. The miners started extracting stone from the rock outcrops north of the settlement. The nomads tended the 2 lizards that Bazir had brought with him. The settlement grew. 4 houses became 8. 8 became 12. The canals from the well were extended. The fields expanded to 600 square meters. Daniel worked 18 hours a day. He drew, he calculated, he built, he explained, he demonstrated, he checked. Soyeon worked alongside him. Sometimes he noticed that she didn't go to sleep until he left. Sometimes he didn't notice anything. Nara noticed. Nara noticed everything. On the 120th day, Han Soyeon arrived, expelled from the Rune Academy for ideas that Daniel was already putting into practice. She brought the knowledge of runes that he lacked and became his main partner in design. Together, they created an improved 5-rune capacitor. By the end of the 4th month, the population had reached 30 people. On the 150th day, Daniel harvested his first crop. 10 kilograms of barley from the first field, 22 kilograms from the second, 32 kilograms of grain. He stood in the middle of the field, holding an ear of grain in his hands, heavy, full, golden. 30 people stood around him and watched. Bazir said that the land of the dead had borne bread. Then he spat over his shoulder, just in case. Nara said the barley was tough. Daniel replied that it would be softer next season. He had already selected seeds from the best ears. Selection. A. Slow. But in 3 generations, the grain will be larger. In 6, twice as large. Nara looked at him as if he were mad. Then she went to grind the barley with the stone mill that Min had carved. 32 kilograms of grain is about 60 days for 30 people if there is only barley. Not enough. But the second crop is already in the ground. The field has been expanded to 1,000 square meters. The third season will be better. Math. On the 163rd day, Emily Kane arrived. She didn't walk across the desert. She came by wagon. A caravan of 8 wagons was traveling from north to south, bypassing the eastern trade routes. The caravan leader was greedy and decided to cut across the edge of the gray bowl. Emily's wagon broke its axle on a rock. The caravan left without waiting for her. She was left alone with a wagon full of fabrics near a place that wasn't on any map. Tarek found her the next morning, red-haired, freckled. She was cursing so much that Tarek, who didn't know half those words, still blushed. Daniel fixed her axle. Min put on a new wheel. Emily looked at the village, at the fields, at the well, at the runic systems, and she wasn't in a hurry to leave. She asked how much the water cost. Daniel said the water was free. Emily looked at him as if he were an idiot. Then she asked how much it cost to live here. Daniel said it was free. You just had to work. Emily sat down in her cart and thought about it for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she went to Daniel and laid out the contents of her purse before him. 14 silver coins, 3 copper ones, a bundle of IOUs, and a small notebook in which, in fine handwriting, were recorded the market prices for 32 cities on the eastern coast. She said she was the 3rd daughter of the impoverished Kane family from the north, that she had run away from an engagement to an old man who wanted not her, but her father's land, that she could count money better than any money changer on the coast, that if Daniel was going to build a city, he needed someone who knew how to trade, because a well and a field are good, but without trade, a city is a village. Daniel looked at her price book. He flipped through it. He looked at the receipts. He looked at her. He asked if she knew the price of barley at the nearest market. Emily said that barley at the Korheim market cost 3 copper coins per sack. But if you take it not to Korheim, but to Dunhar, which is 2 days' journey further, then 5 copper coins, because Dunhar has had a poor harvest for the 3rd year in a row. Daniel nodded, and he handed her the keys to the granary they had finished building a week ago. Emily blinked. She asked if he was serious. Daniel said he was absolutely serious. Emily turned and walked over to the granary. An hour later, she returned with a trading plan for the next 3 months, written on the back of one of her IOUs. The plan was good. Daniel saw it right away. She proposed not selling the barley as grain. Instead, grind it into flour and sell it as flour. Flour costs 3 times as much as grain. Invest the profits in seeds for other crops. Beans, millet, flax. Diversification. She didn't know that word, but she understood the principle. Emily took to trading like a starving person to bread. In the first month, she established a trade with 2 passing caravans. Flour from the gray bowl for seeds and cloth. In the second month, she traded a set of tools with a wandering blacksmith for 20 clay flasks marked with runes. The flasks cost her a day's work as a potter. The tools cost a month's work at the mine. She sat by the fire that evening and counted her profits, bending her fingers. Min asked why she was bending her fingers if she could count in her head. Emily replied that she liked bending her fingers. It felt good. On the 185th day, Daniel began building an aqueduct. Not a ditch in the ground, a real aqueduct. A stone trough on supports. 5 kilometers from the well to the eastern clay quarry. So Young calculated the runic nodes. a current-sustaining rune every 500 meters, a sealing rune at every joint, filtration runes at the inlet and outlet. Daniel calculated the slope, 2 centimeters per meter, perfect for gravity flow with runic acceleration. Tarek and Min led the construction crew, 15 people, stonemasons, porters, layers. They worked from dawn to dusk. Daniel was at the construction site every day. He checked every joint, every corner, every stone. So-Yun followed him and inscribed runic symbols on every keystone. They worked in unison. He pointed to a spot. She drew a rune. He checked. She corrected. Words were unnecessary. On the 200th day, So-Yun grabbed his sleeve in the evening as he was heading to the construction site in the dark. She said he hadn't slept in 2 days. Daniel said the aqueduct was almost finished and there were 300 meters left. So-Yun said that 300 meters could wait until morning. Daniel looked at her. She didn't look away. He sat down. She sat down next to him. They sat in silence for 10 minutes. Then So-Yun said she needed to explain something to him about the rune's closing circuit. Daniel said he was listening. She explained. He asked questions. She answered. They talked until dawn. In the morning, he went to sleep in her room because it was too far to walk to his own. It wasn't a declaration of feelings. It wasn't a confession. It was like 2 wires that had always run side by side and at the point simply touched each other and closed the circuit. Nara saw Daniel leaving So-Yun's room that morning. She said nothing. She poured him some tea. She poured So-Yun some tea. Then she poured herself some. On the 210th day, the aqueduct was ready. 5 kilometers of stone trough, 23 supports, 10 rune nodes. Iris walked the entire length of the aqueduct and activated each node in turn. The runes flashed one after another like streetlights at night. The water began to flow. From the well to the east, in a steady stream, no interruptions, no leaks. Daniel stood at the end point and waited. When the first water reached the outlet, he held out his palm. Cold, clear. He looked back. 5 kilometers, a stone aqueduct stretching into the sunset, and 30 people standing along it. They watched the water and said nothing. Nara stood closest of all. She said that the firstborn probably did it the same way. Daniel replied that he didn't know how the firstborn did it, but he does it the way he was taught. A 2% slope, sealed joints, and quality control at every stage. Nara shook her head. She said he was hopeless. The first barley harvest yielded 32 kilograms of grain. Emily Kane, who had become head of trade and finance, arrived. She established trade with the caravans and suggested selling flour instead of grain. Daniel and So-Yun built a 5-kilometer runic aqueduct with 10 nodes. The relationship between Daniel and So-Yun shifted from professional to personal, naturally and without words. On the 230th day, Rachel Morgan arrived. She did not come because of rumors about water. She came to die. Tall, a scar across her left eyebrow, men's clothing, a sword at her belt, an empty flask, empty eyes. She sat by the well and drank water in silence. She asked no one anything. She looked at no one. She drank her fill and lay down next to the well, face down. She lay there until evening. Nara brought her food. Rachel didn't touch it. In the morning, Daniel approached her. He asked who she was. Rachel said she was the former captain of a mercenary unit, 20 fighters, the best light unit on the Eastern Front. A 3-year contract with the Council of 9, 14 operations, 8 victories. Then the ambush in Crane Gorge. Imperial runes brought the gorge's walls crashing down on the unit. Of the 20, she was the only survivor. She didn't know why. A rock fell so that she ended up in a crevice between 2 boulders. For 3 days, she heard the wounded moaning. On the 3rd day, it fell silent. She crawled out. 20 bodies. She buried each one with her bare hands. Then she walked, as far as the eye could see. Her eyes looked south. She walked for 3 months. She went without food for days at a time. She drank from puddles. She didn't want to live. But her legs kept moving. Her body refused to stop, a soldier's habit. Daniel listened in silence. Then he asked if all she knew how to do was kill. Rachel looked at him for the first time. There was something dangerous in her eyes. She said yes, only kill. Daniel said he didn't believe her. A man who had buried 20 bodies with his own hands knew how to do more than just kill. He knew how to keep people, alive and dead. And he needed someone like that. Because the settlement was growing, and soon it wouldn't just be refugees and traders coming here. Those who wanted to take things would come. And he needs someone who can ensure the builders can work in peace. Not an army, a guard. Rachel was silent for a long time. Then she asked how many men he had. Daniel said 35. Rachel asked how many of them could handle a weapon. Daniel said he didn't know. Rachel stood up. She brushed the sand off her clothes and went to count them. By evening, she returned with the numbers. 11 men were capable of physical work with weapons. 3 of them had experience. Tariq had served in his tribe's militia. Min had fought with a knife because the slaves were given nothing else. Bazir had been a hunter in his youth. The rest were untrained but strong. Rachel said that in 3 months she would turn them into a patrol guard. Not soldiers, a guard. The difference is that a soldier goes to kill. A guard stands and doesn't let anyone through. Daniel nodded. Rachel started the next day. She put the volunteers through their paces at dawn, running, drills, spear work, shield work. Daniel watched and thought about other things. He thought that Rachel was not just about the guard. Rachel was about discipline, structure, order. You can keep 35 people going on enthusiasm, not 100. 100 requires rules, schedules, duties. He sat down that evening and wrote the first charter of the Grey Bull, on a clay tablet because there was no paper. Every resident works 6 hours a day for the common good. The rest of the time is theirs. Water is free. Food is distributed equally until there is a surplus. When there is a surplus, everyone receives a share proportional to their contribution. Disputes are resolved by a council of 5 elders: Daniel, Soyun, Emily, Rachel, and Nara. He showed the tablet to Rachel. Rachel read it. She said there was no section on punishments. Daniel asked what kind. Rachel said theft, fighting, insubordination. Daniel thought for a moment. He wrote 3 more lines. Theft, return of the stolen item plus 2 days of extra work. Fighting, 3 days of extra work for both. Disobeying a guard's order during a dangerous situation. Banishment. Rachel read it. She nodded. She said it was lenient, but it would do for a start. On the 250th day, rumors spread beyond the bowl. Daniel found out about it when a merchant on a lizard rode up to the settlement and asked for directions to the place where they sold the miraculous flower. Emily sold him 3 sacks for 6 copper coins each, twice as expensive as in Korheim. The merchant didn't haggle. He said that in Korheim they were talking about a desert that had blossomed, that they speak of a Barren without kin or clan who discovered the secret of the firstborn, that some do not believe it, and some are already gathering caravans. Daniel sat and listened. Then he looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at him. They both understood the same thing. Caravans are good, but caravans are people, and people aren't just merchants. Among them will be spies, scouts, thieves, those who come to see where the weak spots are. Rachel doubled the patrols. Daniel began designing a wall. Not a fortress wall, not a military wall, just a wall, a stone wall, 2 men high, with a single gate to the east, so that everyone entering the Grey Bull would have to pass through the gate, so that the guards could see everyone. Soyeon suggested adding a runic pattern to the wall, a detection rune. She had found it in one of her books, a simple symbol that glows when a living creature passes nearby. If such runes were carved all along the wall, the guards would see any attempt to climb over. Daniel looked at her, then at the wall's blueprint, then back at her. He said it was an alarm system. Soyeon didn't understand the word. He said it was perfect. Construction of the wall began on the 260th day. 40 people, the entire village except for the children, the elderly, and the patrols. Stone from the northern quarry, clay mortar, rune knots every 20 meters. Iris walked along the wall and activated the runes. The boy had grown over those months. He was no longer silent. He spoke little, but he spoke, and his control over the rune energy had become more precise. Before, he could only pour power into the circuit like water into a glass. Now he was learning to measure it out. So-yeon worked with him every evening. She showed him exercises from the books. Iris listened intently and practiced quietly. On the 272nd day, a rider approached the gates, alone, on a large war lizard, dressed in fine clothes, with a coat of arms on his cloak. Rachel met him at the gate. The rider identified himself, an envoy from House Varick. Lord Gavin Varick, head of the house, sends his greetings to the Baron of the Grey Bowl, and his surprise, and an invitation to a meeting. Rachel brought the envoy to Daniel. Daniel was sitting in his workshop with up to his elbows in clay, sketching a sewer map on the floor. He looked at the messenger. The messenger looked at him. The messenger had expected to see someone else, not a man in a dirty shirt with coal under his fingernails. Daniel wiped his hands. He read the invitation. He looked at Rachel. Rachel shook her head. A trap. Daniel looked at So-yeon. So-yeon bit her lip. He looked at Emily. Emily raised her eyebrows and said they had to go, because if they didn't go, Varick would think they were afraid. And if they were afraid, that meant they were weak, and the weak get eaten. Daniel wrote a reply. Barren. So thanks, Lord Varick, for the invitation, and would be pleased to receive him at the Grey Cup. The messenger read it and asked again, At the Grey Cup. Daniel nodded. Let the Lord come and see for himself. The messenger left. Rachel said that this was either a very smart move or a very stupid one. Daniel said it was the only move, because Varick must see that the bull is not a threat. The bull is a partner, and to do that, he needs to show him the city. Rachel Morgan arrived as a former captain who had lost her entire squad and became the head of the guard. Daniel wrote the settlement's first charter. Rumors of the Grey Bull spread beyond its borders and attracted merchants. Construction began on a wall with a runic alarm system. House Varick sent an envoy with an invitation, and Daniel responded with a counter-invitation. On the 305th day, Lord Gavin Warwick arrived at the Grey Bull. He arrived with a detachment of 20 horsemen, heavy war horses, battle armor, spears in scabbards. Rachel met them at the gate and said that 3 would be allowed inside, the Lord and 2 escorts. The rest would wait outside. Water and food would be provided for those waiting. The captain of the Warwick Guard began to protest. Rachel looked at him. The captain fell silent. Lord Varick dismounted. He was 52 years old, graying temples, a neat beard, intelligent, tired eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept enough for the last 30 years. Daniel met him at the central square. The square hadn't been paved yet. Here and there, unfinished walls jutted out. Scaffolding made of stone pillars stood nearby. There was dust and the noise of construction everywhere. Warwick looked around. He looked at the well, at the canals, at the fields stretching southward, at the houses, at the people who were working and paying him no mind. Daniel didn't give a speech. He simply led Varick through the settlement, in silence. He showed him the well. He showed him how the water flowed through the canals. He showed him the aqueduct. He showed him the fields. Barley and beans stood like a green wall. He showed him the workshop where the potter made bricks. He showed him the smithy they had finished building a month ago. He showed him the rune wall with detection symbols. He showed him the condenser. So-yeon explained how it worked. Varick listened in silence. His face was expressionless. Then they sat down in Daniel's house. Emily brought tea, real tea. She'd haggled for it from the last caravan. Varick drank and said nothing. Then he spoke. He said he was impressed. And that was exactly why he'd come in person. Because rumors can be false, but what he'd seen wasn't. He said that the Grey Bull bordered the Warwick lands, that for 500 years the Warwicks had used the bull as a buffer zone, no man's land, dead land, a dumping ground where they dumped what they didn't need, including people. And now this dumping ground had suddenly become a city, with water, with bread, with rune systems that no one else on the continent has. He said that this was a problem, not for him personally, for the order of things. Daniel asked what order. Varric said the order in which the great houses own lands with runes, while runeless lands remain empty. This order has stood for 1,000 years. It is imperfect. It is cruel to those born elsewhere. But it works. People know their place. Houses know their obligations. The council knows its role. And if one man from nowhere proves in 10 months that dead land can be revived, then that means the entire order is based on a lie. That runeless lands are not hopeless. That the aristocracy is unnecessary. That 1,000 years have been 1,000 years of senseless suffering. He said there are people who will accept this, and there are people who will kill for it. Daniel listened. Then he asked which group Lord Varric belonged to. Varric was silent for a long time. Then he said he didn't know yet. But he wanted to know one thing, what Daniel planned to do next. Daniel stood up. He walked over to the wall where plans had been drawn in charcoal. He pointed. Water supply, sewer system, field expansion, grain storage, school, market, all for the coming year. Warwick looked at the drawings. Then he asked, and after that? Daniel said that next were other villages, the neighboring wastelands, those lands considered dead. He would teach people to repair runes, to build circuits, to lay water pipes. Not just him, the school, Soyun's students, methods, documentation, so that any literate person could take a blueprint and replicate it. Varric said that this was the end of the aristocracy. Daniel said that this was the beginning of engineering. Varric stood up. He paced the room. He stopped by the window. He looked out at the street where Bazir's children were playing in the dust. Then he turned and said that Daniel was either the greatest idealist in the continent's history or the greatest destroyer, and that perhaps they were one and the same. He left that very day, without saying yes or no, without promising peace, without declaring war. He just left. Rachel stood at the gate and watched him go. She said there would be a war. Emily said, maybe not. Maybe he'll get scared. Soyun said nothing. She stood next to Daniel and looked west. Daniel said that Varric wasn't scared, and there wouldn't be a war yet, because Varric is a smart man, and smart people don't go to war until they've exhausted all other options. But he will exhaust those options, because Daniel isn't going to stop. On the 320th day, Una Park appeared, small, noisy, barefoot, 17 years old. She didn't come from the desert. She had always been here. Her nomadic tribe had roamed along the southern borders of the bowl for centuries. Una knew every rock, every trail, every crevice where one could wait out a sandstorm. She had been watching the settlement for 2 months before approaching. She sat on the rocks a kilometer from the wall and watched. Then she came and said she wanted to eat. Daniel gave her a bowl of porridge. Una ate it. Then she said she knew where 4 more wells were on the bowl's territory. Buried, forgotten, but she knew. Her grandmother knew, and her grandmother's grandmother. Daniel looked at her. Then he took out a map. He said, "Show me." Una poked her finger at 4 spots. Daniel looked at the arrangement of the spots. They lay in a circle, around a single center, the same center around which the stone slabs were arranged. He asked what was in the center. Una said they don't go there, that her tribe calls this place the Eye of the Wasteland, that the earth hums there if you put your ear to it, that sometimes at night light comes from there, faint, blue, like runes. Daniel looked at Soyun. Soyun turned pale. She knew what that meant. Light from the ground. The hum. It's the heartstone. The firstborn's source of energy. The very one that, according to legend, burned out 1,000 years ago. It didn't burn out. It's there, beneath them. Daniel rolled up the map. He looked at Una. He said she needed a guide. Someone who knew the area better than anyone. Someone who would be paid with a bowl of porridge 3 times a day and a room. Una said she needed boots. Porridge is fine, but it's cold walking barefoot on the rocks. Daniel said she'd get boots. Una stayed. Lord Varric arrived in person and saw the settlement. A crucial conversation took place between him and Daniel about how the success of the Grey Bull threatens the entire aristocratic order. Varric left without making a decision. Una Pack, a local nomad who knew the area, went along. She pointed out 4 buried wells and a place called the Eye of the Wasteland, from which light emanates at night. Soyun realized that beneath the bowl lies the heartstone of the firstborn. On the 350th day, the population of the Grey Bowl exceeded 200. Daniel counted everyone, not for statistics, for water supply. 200 people meant at least 4,000 liters of water per day. Drinking, cooking, washing, watering, laundry, production. The well yielded 2,800. The condensers yielded 160. 2 small runes yielded another 30. A total of 2,990 liters. A shortfall of 1,000 liters per day. He solved this problem in a week. Una led him to 2 of the 4 filled-in wells. The first was 4 kilometers to the north, collapsed but not destroyed. Tarek and a crew of 10 cleared it out in 5 days. An artesian spring, 1,200 liters per day. The second well was further south, deeper, more difficult. It took 10 days to clear, but it yielded 2,000 liters. The deficit was covered, with a surplus. Daniel stood over the figures that evening and calculated. 6,190 liters a day, enough for 400 people. No, for 300, if we factor in the growth of the fields and production. He was thinking ahead, always 3 steps ahead. On the 360th day, he opened a school. Not a building. There was no building yet. A shelter made of stone and fabric. 3 rows of stone slabs. A board made of fired clay on which one could draw with charcoal. The first teacher was Soyun. She taught runic writing. 5 students to start with. Tarek, Min, 2 boys from the last caravan, and a girl from the Bazir family, 12 years old, quiet, attentive. Her lines were smoother than those of the adults. Soyun taught them the basic symbols: line, arc, angle, closure, break, buffer stroke. Then simple runes: water, heat, light. Then combinations: how to connect one rune to another, what angle, what line thickness, where a buffer is needed. Daniel sat in class whenever he could. He listened. He asked questions. Sometimes he corrected Soyun. Sometimes she corrected him. The students watched them and smiled. On the 370th day, the first real trade caravan arrived. Not just passing through, purposeful. 12 wagons, 60 people, goods from the East Coast, fabrics, spices, metal, tools, seeds. The caravan leader called himself Oren, fat, cunning, with gold earrings in both ears. He came because Emily had sent him a letter with prices: flour from the Grey Bowl, pottery with runic markings, clay flasks that keep water fresh for 3 weeks thanks to a cooling rune on the bottom. Oren brought metal. Daniel had been waiting for metal for 8 months. Iron strips, nails, wire, tools, saws, hammers, pliers. Emily haggled with Oren for 4 hours. Daniel could hear her voice 3 houses away. She traded the caravan's entire iron stock for 300 flasks with runic markings. Oren left, shaking his head. Then he came back and asked if he could order another 500 flasks by his next visit. Emily said he could, at double the price. Oren looked at her with respect. Then he said he'd be back in 2 months, with metal, with wood, with anything, if the flasks were ready. Daniel watched the scene and thought that Emily was worth 10 soldiers. She had created demand out of nothing. A clay flask with a cooling rune. The cost was 1 hour of the potter's work and 5 minutes of Iris's work. The selling price was the equivalent of 2 kilograms of iron. A markup was impossible. But the rune marking made the flask unique. No one else had any like it. A monopoly. On the 380th day, the first attack happened. Night. A sentry on the wall saw movement. 30 figures in the darkness. Rachel raised the guard within a minute. 12 fighters on the wall, Spears, shields, torches, rune lights on the wall flared up as the strangers drew closer. The detection rune was working. Every stone in the wall glowed where a living body was nearby. Rachel saw everything. She saw that they were coming in two groups, 20 from the east, 10 from the south. Classic tactics, a diversion and a flank attack. She divided the guards, 8 to the east, 4 to the south. She took her position on the southern wall herself. The attackers approached the gate and began to pound it, a log battering ram. Rachel didn't wait. She gave the order, and the guards threw pots of boiling water from the wall. Daniel had connected the heat rune to the water channel along the wall a week ago, just in case. The moment had come. Boiling water poured down on the attackers. Screams, howls, panic. The southern group turned and ran before reaching the wall. They saw the stones glowing with runic fire and decided the wall was enchanted. 10 minutes later, it was all over. The attackers had left. 2 wounded men were left at the gate. Nara bandaged them up. In the morning, Rachel interrogated the prisoners. Mercenaries, hired by someone. They didn't know who. They'd been told there was a village in the desert. No walls, no guards, with a full granary. Easy pickings. They hadn't been told about the wall, much less the runes. Rachel let them go. She gave them water for the road and told them to tell their employer that next time she wouldn't stop at boiling water. Daniel stood on the wall and watched as the mercenaries headed east. Soyeon stood beside him. She was trembling, not from the cold. She had never seen violence before. Daniel put his hand on her shoulder. He said the wall had held. The runes held. The system held. Soyeon nodded. Then she said she wanted to make the wall stronger. Daniel replied that he did too. They went downstairs and sketched out a new diagram until morning. A detection rune plus a sound rune. When someone approaches the wall doesn't just glow, it hums. Loudly. Loud enough for the whole city to hear. A siren. A rune siren. Iris activated it the next day. They tested it 3 times. Min approached the wall from the outside. The wall howled so loudly that Bazir's children began to cry, and even Tarek flinched. Rachel listened to the siren's wail and smiled for the first time since she'd been in the Grey Bowl. On the 400th day, Daniel stood on the roof of the water tower. The tower had been completed 3 days ago. Stone, 5 meters high, with a runic circuit for pumping water from the well to the top. A 1,000-liter tank at the top. Pipes ran down from the tank. Clay pipes, fired and joined to the joints with runic sealing. The pipes led to 10 distribution points throughout the settlement. 10 faucets, stone valves, turn it, and water flows. Warm. Soyeon had added a heating rune to the circuit. The water passed through an underground section where a heat rune brought it to body temperature. Not hot, not cold. Warm. Daniel stood on the tower and looked down. 400 people. He didn't know when there had become so many. They came every week, 5 at a time, 10 at a time, 20 at a time. Nomads, refugees, outcasts, artisans, people with nowhere else to go. People who had heard that in the dead desert there was a place where water flowed from the wall and grain grew in the sand. Down below, Emily was yelling at an apprentice who had dropped a pot of ink. Rachel was lining up the morning patrol at the gate. Nara was leading a group of children to the infirmary for a checkup. Yuna had run south to check the caravan trail. Suyan was sitting in the workshop, drawing runes on pipes for the second phase of the water supply system. Tarek was silently chiseling stone for the new wall. Min was repairing a lock on the gate. Iris stood at the school blackboard and showed the younger children how to draw a baseline. He was teaching. A 10-year-old boy who hadn't spoken a word a year ago was now teaching others. The city was alive. Daniel looked at it and thought that this wasn't a city. Not yet a city. It was a settlement. Dirty, unfinished, with crooked walls and unpaved streets. But water flowed through it. Lights were on. Grain was growing. People worked and laughed and cursed and argued and fell asleep under a roof. A year ago, there was sand here. Only sand. He went downstairs. He walked over to the nearest faucet. He turned the valve. Warm water poured over his hands. He stood there and watched the water. An old woman stopped nearby. one of those who had arrived a month ago with the Eastern caravan. She stood there and watched the water. Then she held out her hands. The water ran down her fingers, warm. She stood there for a long time. Then she sat down on the ground and began to cry, quietly, silently. Daniel didn't ask why. He knew. She had never in her life washed her hands with warm water from a faucet. The population had grown to 400 people. Daniel cleared out 2 buried wells, solving the water supply problem. Soyan opened a school for rune drawing. The first dedicated trade caravan arrived, and Emily established a profitable trade in rune flasks. The first nighttime attack by mercenaries was repelled thanks to a wall with a rune alarm system and boiling water. A water tower with 10 hot water taps was built throughout the settlement. On the 420th day, the princess arrived. Only, no one knew she was a princess. She came with Oren's caravan, a quiet girl dressed as a maid, black-haired, slender arms, straight back, too straight for a maid. Emily was registering the new arrivals and writing down their names. The girl said her name was Leah, no last name. She said she could read and write. Emily asked what else. Leah said she could play the flute, and she knew 4 languages. Emily looked at her for a long time. Then she asked if she knew how to do laundry. Leah hesitated. Emily sighed and sent her to Nara in the kitchen. Nara would teach her. In the kitchen, Leah proved useless. She didn't know how to peel vegetables. She didn't know how to knead dough. She didn't know how to start a fire without a rune. Nara grumbled for 3 days. Then she stopped, because she noticed something else. Leah was a quick learner. Everything, on the first try. Nara showed her once how to cut a root vegetable. Leah repeated it, perfectly. Nara showed her how to knead dough for barley flatbreads. Leah remembered the proportions right away. A week later, she was cooking better than half the kitchen help. 2 weeks later, Nara told Daniel that the girl wasn't a servant. Daniel asked why. Nara said that maids don't know 4 languages, and they don't stand with their backs straight as a pole, and they don't flinch when someone enters the room from behind. Daniel shrugged. He said that if the girl didn't want to say who she was, that was her business. The main thing was that she worked. A month later, Daniel noticed Leah at school. She was sitting in the back row, listening to Soyeon's lesson. Not runic drawing. Soyeon had started teaching a second course, reading and writing for those who didn't know how. Half the residents of the Grey Bowl couldn't read. Leah sat in the back and helped her neighbor make out the letters. Quietly, without asking, she just leaned over and pointed. Daniel approached her after class. He asked if she wanted to teach. Leah looked at him in surprise. She said she had never taught before. Daniel said she was already teaching. He had seen it. He offered her the chance to lead a separate group. Bazir's children, the children of the new arrivals. 2 15 children between the ages of 6 and 14. Reading, writing, arithmetic. Leah agreed. A week later, the children adored her. She told them stories. She knew hundreds of stories, legends of the firstborn, tales of the Eastern houses, historical chronicles of the Council of Nine. She told them so well that the children sat with their mouths agape and forgot to blink. 2 months later, Daniel gave her an entire educational sector, 3 groups, children, teenagers, illiterate adults. Leah taught all 3. She drew up a schedule. She found old books in Soyeon's bag that were suitable for teaching. She carved letters into clay tablets for the youngest ones. She blossomed. Where had the quiet maid with downcast eyes gone? Standing before the class was a girl with a fiery gaze who was explaining to a nomad's 10-year-old son what fractions were and why they were needed when dividing the harvest. The truth came to light on the 510th day. A horseman rode up to the gate, alone, unarmed, in a dusty cloak. He asked the guard where to find a girl named Leah. Rachel led him to Daniel. The horseman removed his hood, an old man, thin, with a scar across his entire face. He said he served the house of Wenhao, or rather, had served. The house of Wenhao had been destroyed. A palace coup. An eastern vassal decided he could become the master. They slaughtered everyone. Everyone except the youngest daughter, whom an old servant managed to lead out through an underground passage. Princess Leah Wenhao, 19 years old, the last of her line. He had been searching for her for 7 months. Daniel listened. Then he called for Leah. She entered. She saw the old man. She stopped. The old man dropped to one knee. He spoke her full title. Princess Leah of the House of Wenhao, heiress to the Eastern Domain, keeper of the seal. Leah stood and said nothing. Then she looked at Daniel. There was fear in her eyes. Not fear that she had been found, fear that now everything would change, that now he would look at her differently, as a title, not a person. Daniel looked at her, then at the old man, then at her again, and said that it didn't change anything, that she needed to go back to the third group because arithmetic class was in an hour. Leah blinked, then nodded. Then she left. The old man looked at Daniel, puzzled. Daniel said that Princess Leah was a good teacher, the best in the Grey Bowl, and that if the old man wanted to stay, there would be work for him. The old man stayed. His name was Horace. He became a night watchman on the south wall. On the 520th day, Daniel laid the sewer system. Not a cesspool, a system. Clay pipes underground, a 2% slope, a collector on the southern edge, a decomposition rune in the collector that processed the waste into safe compost. Jan found the decomposition rune in one of the books and modified it. Daniel designed the pipes. Min and a crew of 20 dug the trenches. Tarek hewn stone for the collector. 2 months of work. At the same time, Emily signed a trade agreement with the Calver House to the northeast, the first official agreement. Flour and rune ceramics from the Grey Bowl in exchange for metal and wood from Calver. Wood. Finally. Daniel had been waiting for wood since day one. You can build with stone, but you can't make furniture out of stone. Doors, window frames, tools, carts. The first shipment of wood arrived a month later. 200 logs. Daniel set aside a separate workshop for Min. Min turned out to be a natural-born carpenter. He made furniture with a precision that amazed even Daniel. His chairs stood perfectly level. His doors closed without a squeak. His shelves held 3 times the weight they were meant to. A former slave who thought he couldn't do anything. On the 550th day, Daniel paved the main street. Stone slabs fitted together. A drainage channel beneath the slabs. On top, a smooth surface over which a cart could roll without jolting. Grooves on the sides for rainwater, though there was no rain here, not yet anyway. Rachel had grown accustomed to the Grey Bowl. She no longer drank it undiluted. Her guard had grown to 30 men. Patrols, watches, training fights every morning. She taught them not only how to fight, she taught them how to think, how to assess a threat, how to choose a position, how to retreat without losing formation. She had become someone else. Not a dead person seeking a grave, a commander defending a home. She didn't say it, but one evening Daniel saw her standing by the wall, looking out at the city, at the lights, at the people, and stroking the stone of the wall with her palm, as if it were alive. On the 560th day, Sister Margaret arrived. Tall, calm, in a simple gray hooded robe, with a bag of herbs and a book bound in dark leather. She had come on foot from the west, over a mountain pass, alone. She was 38 years old. She was a nun of an order that the church considered almost heretical. They believed that the firstborn were human, not gods. Humans who had learned to draw runes, people who could be understood and whose knowledge could be replicated. For this, the order had been persecuted for 300 years. Margaret came because she had heard of a Barren in the desert who repairs runes, who connects them into diagrams, who does what the forbidden books of her order wrote about. She wanted to see it with her own eyes. Daniel showed her everything: the aqueduct, the water pipes, the condensers, the wall, the sewer system, the school. Margaret watched in silence. Then she asked to see So-Yon's blueprints. So-Yon showed them to her. Margaret flipped through the pages. Then she opened her own book. She placed it next to So-Yon's. So-Yon's blueprints and the order's records matched. Not exactly, but the principles were the same. So-Yon was reinventing what the order had preserved for 300 years. Margaret closed the book. She looked at Daniel. She said she had been waiting for this for 30 years, that her whole life had been a wait for the moment when someone would prove that the order had not been wrong. Daniel said that her order's books would form the basis of the school curriculum. Margaret was silent for a long time. Then she took off her hood. She squared her shoulders, and for the first time in 30 years, she didn't look like someone who was hiding. She became the town doctor and the school's second teacher. Nara finally got an assistant in the infirmary and stopped grumbling. For 2 weeks. Then she found a new reason. Leah Wen Hao was revealed to be the princess of a destroyed house, but Daniel did not change his attitude toward her and kept her on as a teacher. A sewer system imbued with a rune of decay was laid. The first trade agreement with House Calver was concluded. Sister Margaret arrived from the Order of Heretics, whose knowledge confirmed So-Yeon's work. Margaret became a doctor and a teacher. The city gained paved streets and a growing infrastructure. On the 600th day, House Varick declared war. Not formally. Formally, Lord Gavin Varick sent a note to the Council of Nine stating that the Baron of the Grey Bowl was illegally using water resources belonging to Varick lands, that the underground springs feeding the Grey Bowl's wells originated on Varick territory, that this was theft, that the Council was obligated to intervene. The Council did not intervene. The Council was at war with the Kane Empire and had no time for desert barons. But Warwick wasn't waiting for a response. He was waiting for a pretext. A week after the note, a Warwick detachment blocked the eastern trade route to the Grey Bowl. 60 soldiers, a fortified camp, a roadblock. Oren's caravan was turned back. Emily found out and turned pale with rage. The eastern route accounts for 80% of trade. Without it, the Grey Bowl is cut off from the markets. Rachel suggested an attack. 60 against 30. Bad odds, but not impossible. Daniel said no. There would be no attack. There would be no bloodshed. There would be engineering. He sat down with a map and worked for 3 days. He didn't sleep. So-Yeon brought him food and tea. He ate without looking up. On the 4th day, he called a meeting. He laid out the map. He showed them. The aquifer beneath the Grey Bowl is not an isolated system. It is part of a vast underground basin that stretches for 100 kilometers. And one of the branches of this basin feeds Mirror Lake, the main source of water for the Varick home, their pride, their sacred place, their economy. For 200 years, the Varick fields have been irrigated from Mirror Lake. For 200 years, they've believed the lake belongs to them. But the lake is fed from underground, and what lies underground belongs to whoever gets to it first. Emily asked what he was proposing. Daniel said he was proposing to build a rune well on the border of the territories, a deep one, with a rune of heightened power. This well would draw water from the same aquifer that feeds Mirror Lake. Not all of it, just a portion. Enough for the lake's water level to start dropping. Slowly, 1 centimeter a day. In a month, Varick would notice. In 2, he'd panic. And then Daniel would offer him a deal. Rachel said that was cruel. Daniel said that was hydrology. So-Yeon said that a rune well of that power required a heartstone. Iris's ordinary gift wouldn't be enough. Daniel looked at her, then at the map, then at the point in the center of the Grey Bowl that Yuna called the Eye of the Wasteland. So-Yeon shook her head. She said it was dangerous, that no one knew what was down there, that the heartstone might be unstable, it might be damaged, it might be a trap. Daniel said they wouldn't dig down to the stone. They would lay a rune circuit from the surface down, like an antenna. If the stone is there, and if it emits even a drop of energy, the circuit will catch it and direct it into the well. They won't wake the stone. They'll take what seeps out on its own. So-Yeon thought about it for 2 days. Then she agreed, but on one condition. She would design the circuit herself, with a triple buffer and an emergency cutoff. If the energy exceeded the rated capacity, the circuit would open on its own. Daniel agreed. They worked on it for 10 days. Yuna pointed out the spot, the thinnest part, where the rumbling from underground could be heard even while standing still. Daniel felt the bedrock, cracks, lots of cracks. Through them, the stone's energy rose to the surface, like heat through cracks in a wall. Soyeon drew the circuit directly on the rock. Complex, 17 rune nodes, 3 buffer rings, an emergency brake at every level. Iris stood in the center of the outline. He placed his palms on the stone. He closed his eyes. The runes flashed, and the world changed. Energy surged from below, not a drop, in a torrent. Iris cried out and pulled his hands away. The buffer rings glowed red. 1, 2, 3. The first level emergency cutoff had triggered. The circle cut the flow by a third. The second buffer held. The third didn't even activate. Soyeon exhaled. Daniel looked at her. She was as pale as a ghost. But the circuit was working. Energy from beneath the ground flowed along the runic lines and drained into the well at the border. The well began pumping water, a lot of water, a great deal of water. Daniel measured it, 12,000 liters a day from a single well. That was more than all the other sources of the Gray Bull combined, and that was only a small fraction of what the stone below was emitting. 3 weeks later, the level of Mirror Lake had dropped by 20 centimeters, a month later by 40. The Varick farmers grew concerned. A month and a half later, Lord Gavin Varick lifted the blockade on the trade route and sent an envoy. Not with an invitation, with a request for a meeting. Daniel received him at City Hall. City Hall was new, stone, 2 stories, with rune heating and glass windows. Soyeon had melted the sand into glass using a heat rune at maximum power. It was warped, a bit cloudy, but it was glass. Varick entered and stopped. He hadn't been here for 8 months. In 8 months, the village had become a town. Paved streets, stone houses, hot water pipes, sewers, a school, a market, a blacksmith shop, a potter's workshop, a weaving workshop, a wall with a rune alarm system, and people, hundreds of people, walking the streets, working, trading, studying, living. Varick sat down across from Daniel. He was silent for a minute. Then he said that Daniel was draining his lake. Daniel said that he was drawing water from a shared underground reservoir, and that he could stop. If Lord Varick stopped blocking the trade routes. Varick said that was blackmail. Daniel said that was hydraulics. Varick said that House Varick had stood for 500 years and would not tolerate blackmail from some upstart from the desert. Daniel said that House Varick had stood for 500 years, and in those 500 years had failed to do what Daniel had done in a year and a half. And that Varick could go to war. He can bring an army. He can even destroy the city. But he won't be able to destroy the idea. Because every person in the Gray Bull knows how to repair runes. Every student at the school can draw a rune diagram for the water supply. You can kill Daniel, but the knowledge has already spread among the people. It won't go back into the bottle. Varick was silent for a long time, a very long time. Then he laughed, quietly, then louder. Then he leaned back in his chair and laughed so hard that Rachel, standing outside the door, put her hand on her sword. He laughed because he understood. He had lost. Not a battle, not a war, an era. He had lost an era. For 500 years, his family had built their power on the notion that runes were a legacy for the chosen few, and one engineer, out of nowhere, had proven in 18 months that it was a lie. Varick stopped laughing. He wiped his eyes. He looked at Daniel, and for the first time in 30 years, he spoke like a man, not a lord. He asked what Daniel wanted from him. Daniel said he wanted peace, a trade agreement, recognition of the Gray Bull as an equal partner, and one more thing. Varick asked what? Daniel said that Varick had 500 years' worth of archives in his basements, maps of rune nodes, descriptions of symbols, blueprints of the firstborn. Daniel wants copies, not the originals, copies, for the school. Varick looked at him. Then he shook his head. Then he said that Daniel really was a madman, but a smart madman. The treaty was signed that same day. Emily drafted the text. Rachel stood guard. Soyeon authenticated the document with a runic seal. Varick left. A month later, a caravan arrived with copies of the archives, 200 scrolls. Soyeon didn't leave the library for 3 days. House Varric had blocked the trade routes, and Daniel responded with an engineering counterattack. He tapped into the energy of the underground Heartstone and built a well that lowered the water level of the Warwick family's Mirror Lake. Warwick was forced to lift the blockade and sign a trade agreement. He admitted defeat and handed over copies of the archives containing the Firstborn's runic blueprints. The circuit to the Heartstone operates through a triple buffer, but the stone's energy proved immense. On the 700th day, the city of Soil received its name. Daniel did not choose it. Yuna did. She said that the nomads call this place Soil, the Sun Gate, because when you stand on the eastern hill at dawn, the light passes directly through the city gates and shines down the main street all the way to City Hall, as if the gates were opening the way for the sun. Daniel hadn't designed it that way. He had oriented the gates toward the east for purely practical reasons. The morning light illuminates the market square. It's convenient for the merchants, but it turned out beautifully, and the name stuck. The Council of Nine sent an inspector, a small, nervous man with an ivory tablet and 2 scribes. He spent a week in Soil. He counted the houses. He counted the people. He counted the wells. He counted the runes. Then he left. 2 months later, an official document arrived. The Council of Nine recognized the town of Soil within the territory of the Grey Bowl. Baron Daniel So was confirmed as the lawful ruler. The tax was symbolic. 3 sacks of barley a year. Emily read the document and laughed. 3 sacks, for a town with a population of 2,000. The council either didn't understand what was going on or didn't want to. Daniel thought it was the latter. On the 720th day, a trade mission from the Kane Empire arrived. 3 people, a diplomat, an interpreter, and a quiet man who introduced himself as a cartographer. Rachel looked at the cartographer and told Daniel that he wasn't a cartographer. He's a scout. Muscles, his posture, the way he scans the wall. He's a soldier. Daniel nodded. He knew. The Kane Empire had learned to stamp runes onto metal. Cheap, mass-produced runes with which they armed their army. But their runes were primitive, singular. They made a rune sword, a rune shield, a rune lamp. Each item, 1 rune, 1 effect. And suddenly, from the desert on the other side of the continent, rumors reached them of a man who combined runes into patterns, who built water systems and alarm systems and heating, who in 2 years had turned barren land into a city. The Empire could not ignore this. Daniel accepted the mission. He showed them the city, not everything. He showed them the water system, the school, the market. He did not show the rune blueprints. He did not show Soyeon's workshop. He did not show the circuit to the Heartstone. The diplomat was polite. He spoke of trade, of mutual benefit, about a possible exchange of knowledge. Daniel listened and nodded. Then he said he was open to trade. Metal blanks from Kane in exchange for runic ceramics from Soil. The diplomat agreed too quickly. Rachel is right. This isn't a trade mission. It's reconnaissance. The cartographer scout disappeared from the guest house on the 2nd night. Yuna tracked him down by the south wall. He was studying runic knots, sketching them. Yuna whistled. A patrol arrived within a minute. The scout didn't resist. He smiled. He said he'd gotten lost. Rachel politely escorted the mission out of the city the next morning. The diplomat protested. Rachel said that nighttime walks near military fortifications were considered espionage, and that in Soil, spies aren't executed. They're simply let out the gate and not allowed back in. The mission left. Daniel knew they would return, not with diplomats, with the army. Not today, not tomorrow, but they would return. On the 750th day, Soyeon finished work on a project that had taken her 3 months, a rune printing station. Not a stamp like Kane's, a system, a stone mold with the negative outline of a rune carved into it. You pour in the clay, you fire it, you get a brick with a finished rune. Precise, standard, reproducible. 1 mold. 100 bricks a day. 100 identical runes. It was a revolution. Before, Soyeon had drawn every rune by hand. It took an hour, 2, sometimes half a day for a complex design. Now, standard runes could be mass-produced like bricks. So-yeon stood in the workshop, holding the first mass-produced rune brick in her hands. The water supply rune. A perfect line, a precise angle, standard thickness. She pressed the brick to her chest and closed her eyes. Daniel stood beside her and understood. This wasn't just a brick. It was scaling. It meant that any village could order a set of rune bricks, assemble a water supply system from them according to the instructions, without a mage, without an engineer, without 10 years of training, just by following the blueprint. He looked at So-yeon. She opened her eyes, looked at him. He said she had just changed the world. Yeon said he was exaggerating. Then she thought about it. Then she said, maybe not. By the 800th day, the neighboring village of Talmor asked So-il to take them under his wing. A village 40 kilometers to the northeast, 200 residents. No water, no runes, no hope. The elder of Talmor came in person, an old man in tattered clothes. He knelt before Daniel. Daniel helped him up. He said there was no need to kneel. He needed to show on the map where the village was. The elder showed him. Daniel sent Yuna on a reconnaissance mission. Yuna returned 4 days later. She described the terrain, the soil, the bedrock. Daniel sketched a plan. A rune well, a canal, a field. So-yeon sent a team of 5 students there with a set of rune bricks and the blueprints. A month later, Talmor had water. The elder wept. His people wept. Daniel didn't go himself. He sent the students. It was more important than going himself, because it proved something. The system works without him. Knowledge is passed on. It scales. It lives its own life. He isn't needed at every point. He is needed at the center, to draw up the next plan, to teach the next students, to build the next school. The city was named So-il and received official recognition from the Council of Nine. The Kane Empire's trade mission turned out to be a reconnaissance mission and was expelled. So-yeon invented a rune printing press for the mass production of standard rune bricks. The village of Talmor became the first branch and received a water supply from the school's students without Daniel's involvement. The system began to operate autonomously. On the 830th day, the Council of Nine's Inquisition arrived in So-il, 6 of them, in white robes with silver embroidery. Grand Inquisitor Cullen, a thin man with dead eyes. He entered the city uninvited. The guards let him through because the Inquisition has the right to enter anywhere. That is the law of the continent. Cullen demanded an audience with the Barren. Daniel received him at City Hall. Cullen sat down and without preamble declared that combined runes were heresy, that the firstborn had left runes as separate sacred symbols, that combining them into patterns meant desecrating the legacy, that the school of rune drawing in So-il taught heresy, that the rune printing press was blasphemy, and that the Inquisition demanded the cessation of all work with combined runes, immediately. Daniel listened. Then he asked what would happen if he refused. Cullen said that the Inquisition was authorized to use force, that a support unit stood outside the city walls, 200 council warriors. Daniel looked at Rachel. Rachel left. She returned 10 minutes later. She nodded. 200, on the western hill, heavy infantry, with single-use runic weapons. Daniel looked at Cullen. Then he stood up and asked him to come with him. Cullen frowned but went along. Daniel led him through the city, in silence, past the waterworks where warm water flowed from the taps, past the school where Leah taught children to read, past the infirmary where Margaret was bandaging a carpenter's arm, past the market where Emily was haggling with 3 merchants at once, past the blacksmith's shop, past the potter's workshop, past the granary, past the fields that stretched for 2 kilometers, green fields in a dead desert. Then he led him to the roof of the water tower. The entire city was visible from the tower. 5,000 people, paved streets, stone houses, the light of the rune lanterns that So-yeon had installed at every intersection, smoke from the smithies, the bustle of the market, children playing in the square. Callan watched. Daniel said that 2 years ago there had been nothing but sand here, just sand, rocks and death for 800 kilometers. Every house down below stands on combined runes. Every drop of water flows through runic circuits. Every lantern operates on a circuit of 3 runes. If Cullen wants to destroy the heresy, he'll have to destroy the city. 5,000 people. Daniel didn't say this as a threat. He spoke as if it were a fact, like an engineer describing the load on a beam. It's a number. It's reality. Decide what to do with her. Cullen was silent. Then he asked why Daniel had brought him here instead of simply turning him away at City Hall. Daniel said it was because Cullen wasn't a fool, that fools don't become Grand Inquisitors, that Cullen sees the truth when he looks at it. And the truth is that the Firstborn's runes were always meant to be combined. This is not heresy. This is engineering. The Firstborn didn't leave behind single runes as sacred symbols. They left behind an alphabet. And for 1,000 years, people stared at the letters and prayed to them instead of forming words. Cullen stood on the roof and looked out over the city. The wind ruffled his white cloak. He was silent for a long time. Then he said that Daniel was either right or cursed, and that Cullen couldn't decide that from the roof of a water tower. He left. The squad went with him. A month later, a letter arrived. The Inquisition was postponing its decision on Soilu indefinitely. Margaret read the letter and, for the first time in her life, drank a mug of Rachel's undiluted. Rachel approved. On the 860th day, the Kane Empire sent not diplomats, an army. 3,000 soldiers, rune swords, rune shields, siege engines with rune projectiles. They set up camp 15 kilometers from the city. Una was the first to spot them. She galloped in, out of breath, to report. Rachel mobilized the garrison, 200 guards, against 3,000. Emily counted the supplies. A month-long siege, maybe a month and a half. Soyeon sat in the workshop and drew plans. Leah took the children to the town hall basement. Margaret prepared the infirmary. Nara silently boiled water. Tarek sharpened an axe. Min checked the gates. Iris stood by the wall and waited. Daniel stood on the town hall roof and looked west. 3,000 dots on the horizon. He wasn't afraid. He had envisioned this situation. Not literally, but he knew it would come. He'd known from day one. A city in the desert that no one thought possible. Sooner or later, they would come for him. The only question was who and when. He went down to the workshop. Soyeon looked up. He said 2 words. Contour 7. Soyeon nodded. Contour 7. They had been planning it for 2 months, in case of a siege. Daniel had redrawn the city plan. Not the whole thing. 3 streets leading from the gates to the center. If the enemy broke through the gates, they would follow the streets. There was no other way. The walls of the houses were too high. The alleys were blocked with stone. 3 streets, 3 corridors. And in each corridor, a rune circuit. A wind rune creating a wall of air. A heat rune heating the stone beneath their feet to the temperature of a frying pan. A water rune unleashing streams from the water pipes above. The rune of sound pounding on the ears so that a person loses their balance. The rune of light, blinding like the sun. 5 runes in each corridor, 15 rune nodes. And Soyeon on the roof of City Hall with the master rune key. She closes the circuits at Daniel's command, one after another, like valves in a system. The Imperial Army reached the walls on the 3rd day. The commander sent an ultimatum. Surrender the city. Hand over the runic technologies. The Barren will be released with honors. Daniel sent back a single word. No. On the 5th day, they launched an assault. 3,000 soldiers with ladders and battering rams. The So-Il wall held for 2 hours. Then the gate cracked. Soldiers poured into the city, into the first corridor, into the western street. 300 men crammed into the narrow space between the walls of the houses. Daniel stood on the roof and watched. Then he said one word to Soyeon. Wind. Soyeon closed the first circuit. A wall of air struck the beginning of the corridor. 300 people fell like ears of grain. A a stampede, screams. The second corridor, another 200. Heat. The stone beneath their feet grew red hot. Soldiers jumped and screamed and threw down their weapons. The third corridor. Water. A torrent crashed down from above, cold, heavy. People were knocked off their feet and swept toward the exit. Then a sound. The runic siren blared at full power. Exclusive videos, story continuations, and bonus content are already available on Patreon before YouTube, so check the link in the description for early access to all new recaps and continuations.